everyone. Welcome back for the Turkey session. My name is Asiye. I'm a Human Rights Solidarity volunteer and a first-year math student in Glasgow, and I'm going to be your host during this Turkey session. We're going to have 3 speakers in this session. As such, it is going to be a bit shorter than the China session, but not less impressive. We have Yavuz Baydar, Julie Ward, and Abdullah Ayasun as our speakers. For those of you who were not with us during the previous sessions, let me repeat some of our house rules. So each speaker will be given 15 minutes to talk. Then we will have another 15 minutes for a Q&A. We wanted this to be as interactive as possible, and that is why we're using Zoom meetings rather than Zoom webinars. So please feel free to share your views, criticisms, and good work in the chat box. When it comes to asking questions, we prefer that you ask your questions yourself, but as you're all muted now, you will have to remind me that you have a question to ask. You can do that by raising your hand or writing to me through the chat box. If you would like me to read your question, please specify that in the chat box. Without taking more of your precious time, I would like to give the word to our first speaker. Yavuz Baydar is the editor-in-chief of ahvalnews.com. Ahval News has become one of the few breathing places of the independent Turkish media. It is published in English, Turkish, and Arabic, and its podcasts are some of the most listened podcasts about Turkey. Already while in Turkey, he was an award-winning journalist. He blogged with the Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, sharing his analysis and views on Turkish politics, the Middle East, Balkans, Europe, U.S.-Turkish relations, and human rights. Also free speech, press freedom, and history. The title of his speech is Freedom of Press in Turkey. Will things get worse before getting better, or are we already at the things can get any worse point? The floor is yours, Yavuz.
Thank you. I hope everyone hears me well. I will try to be as brief and concise as possible. The topic and responses to the topic is already a given, isn't it? It's very, very dark. The domain is getting narrower and narrower, particularly following the conventional journalism in Turkey. The state of digital journalism is also being extremely pressurized in increasing levels by the government pressure, government measures. I think the now 5 or so months old COVID wave made the conditions even harder. In many ways, it has confirmed how hard it is to conduct journalism, domestically speaking, inside Turkey, but also given the overall view of the landscape, media landscape in Turkey, just as a confirmation of that we are going to have to go through even harder times. In general, as almost a rule in Turkish domain, the access to information, transparency has always been deeply problematic, with or without challenges like COVID-19. Although there was a very brief thaw in media's access to the sources, official sources, let's say between 2002 through maybe 2005 or 6, this has reversed in a very, very severe way. Access to information was promised by the government, but that promise was never fully responded and established as a systematized reform. And that, of course, provided and still provides a lot of difficulties. You, as a journalist in conventional media, or be that in digital media, are left in the dark. Local administrations, as well as central administration, does never allow full access to information or databases that are supposed to be open and public. Also, another important element that makes things difficult is the decline of professionals in the sector. There was really never well-defined investigative journalism in Turkey. Very, very few journalists could have possibilities, resources to work as investigative reporters, but they were actually only a handful. So this tradition is not there in Turkish landscape. So all we are left with is basically scarcer and scarcer resources, lower and lower budgets, and given to that also nearly suffocated conventional media in Turkey, up to 93-94% of the conventional media sector is now under direct control or indirect control of the government, which means we are facing a huge propaganda or black propaganda machine in Turkish domain. The small flicker of light has been in the past 5 or so years, digital media, pockets of it, small entities inside Turkey and outside Turkey, which has been making some, given us some possibilities to at least cover what we can have access to through local reporters, through digital networks that are able to reach us. Lately, challenges have geometrically multiplied to us. The latest development has been the social media law, the amendments to it, which was already problematic. Now, the government, which is now deeply stuck in a crisis, multi-layered crisis, social, economic, cultural, foreign policy like diplomatic, is in deep dislike for anything left as free or independent media. And this unified allergia or resistance to give access or to give free space to the activities of free and independent media and digital domain covers all the areas that government wants to keep in the dark. Lately, if one should focus on COVID-19 and its coverage, a lot of difficulties came from in the health sector. I'm not speaking about the ministry or departments related to it, to have normal access to doctors or health personnel. The local reporters and sources that we as Ahval have been working with have always had severe difficulties to overcome the intimidation, fear, anxiety of these health sector sources to give us credible information. Most of them stayed away and still do. So what in such circumstances we are left with was only a group of brave doctors and health personnel or ex-health personnel who have access to, on their own, to people through different means to get the information that we think is valuable to make public. So that's why our coverage, including the Ahval's coverage and other alternative media coverage, has been very, let's say, arithmetical. It wasn't really rhythmic. It wasn't consistent as we want it to be. Sometimes we focus on certain provinces in the eastern provinces, Kurdish provinces, for example, which is now at the epicenter of the, again, highly rising epidemic in those provinces. The fear of police, because Turkey has more or less turned into a police state, is very clear. So what we get is basically sort of a third level information. Somebody tells somebody who tells somebody, and it makes it, of course, very difficult to confirm or verify the information, but we can try to vet it through different channels in order to be able to reach information that we think has news value. So this is a great challenge. Also, the reporters or people who domestically get in touch with those sources, hospitals, health centers, etc., physically mainly are unwilling to do so, because as soon as a name of the outlet is mentioned, if it is, let's say, Halk TV, which is an extension of the main opposition party, or any outlet that is possibly linked with the Kurdish political movement, or any liberal outlet such as Ahval or any other alternative outlet, is like entering, mentioning it, the name in such cases is like entering a minefield. And those reporters are high-risk persons, which, of course, we don't want them to cause any harm to them, to their work, to their well-being, because arrest is very common. So this is a very rough environment. And as I said in the beginning, and I will conclude there, it's only, the pandemic has only confirmed and doubled the stakes on the conditions that we have to work in such countries. Nevertheless, we continue to do what we have to do, because we are professionals. This is what we do. This is what we are trained or educated to do. And our main duty is to enlighten and inform the public as much as best as we can. That's where we are. I would say perhaps apart from China, I think Turkey stands out as the country whose conditions for journalism is really at the rock bottom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yavuz Baydar. I'm sure our audience will have many questions for you, but before that, let me give the word to a lady who has been fighting for freedom of expression and cultural rights in Turkey for more than a decade now. She is Julie Ward. She's a British Labour Party politician who served as a member of the European Parliament from 2014 to 2020. During her term in the office, she supported several campaigns for freedom of press in Turkey, including personally flying to Turkey and observing court cases of prominent journalists. In 2016, she was even arrested while flying to Diyarbakir to attend a conference, so she has first-hand experience of issues of freedom of thought and expression in Turkey. The title of her speech is "Fighting for Freedom of Press in Turkey, Personal Account of Concerned Member of the European Parliament." The floor is yours, Julie.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this. I want to, first of all, just applaud the organisation because you are young people who are doing this, and we need young people to step up to the challenges that exist currently. You know, we have many venerable old organisations which have been treading this path, but to see a group of young human rights defenders get their act together and organise this event. You've got a great website as well, and I think your campaigns are really, really cool. So I just want to say something about the fact that, you know, your organisation is new, young, but it's very, very dynamic. I think what is really scary about what we're talking about today is that Turkey is a European country, and more European than Russia. So, you know, we've got an event that's about China, Russia, and Turkey. And Turkey is a European country that has been seeking to be a member of the European Union. So it's been on a trajectory to embrace and embed European values. Now, we know that that hasn't been going anywhere for some years, and certainly the whole time that I was an MEP, there was never any hope of progress in that respect. But I think it is chilling that that Turkey, you know, turns up in this conference as the one country which was on that path, and that is quite scary. You know, it's a NATO country, it's a member of the Council of Europe, and it's also a destination, a holiday destination for millions of tourists, including lots and lots of British tourists. And there seems to be a complete disconnect for many people between the country that they go to, you know, where they're having fun family holidays on the beach with their kids, and the country that is jailing, you know, is the largest jailer of journalists in the world. There doesn't seem to be a lot of understanding, certainly amongst the British public. I don't know what that's like in other European countries. So I think we have a real problem on our hands here. It's also a country that the British government is looking to do more trade deals with post-Brexit. And that poses a lot of problems and challenges, because the Conservative government here is absolutely desperate to demonstrate that Brexit is a good idea and that trade deals are as easy as pie to broker, and already, you know, has a history of selling arms to Turkey. And we can just see that many human rights issues, including issues about freedom of press and journalists, that these things will not be discussed. And for all the faults that the EU has, and it's not a perfect institution, we were very strong. We had a platform for defending human rights, and we could also talk about that in the context of trade and fight for that. So last autumn, for example, when I was still an MEP, there was a debate and a resolution in the European Parliament plenary session on the UN binding mechanism for human rights in trade agreements, which we passed. And I can't imagine that kind of resolution would get majority support in the British Parliament right now, because trade, you know, with a whole range of very disreputable countries is on the cards. And I think we have to talk about the issues around freedom of expression and what is happening to journalists in the full knowledge of what our own government is up to. There's complications at European level because of the refugee management programme, or mismanagement programme might be more accurate, and certainly that hasn't been solved. It was a huge thorn in the side for many of us, and you know, we recognised the problems that we had as a bloc of 28 nations who were not equally sharing the burden or sharing the responsibility for taking in refugees. And here in the UK, we had an appalling record on that. And, you know, if member state governments were not playing their part, we're not taking their responsibilities seriously, it left the EU in a very difficult position. So these are all things, I suppose, that we've got to talk about. So in preparation for today, I thought I would go back over my parliamentary record to have a look at where and how and when I was using my platform, my position, to speak about Turkey and its human rights violations, and specifically about journalists and media. And I wasn't on any competent committees to do with this. I was the chair of the Culture and Education Committee, but actually we didn't have responsibility for media freedom. That was with the Civil Liberties Committee. Neither was I on the delegation for relations with Turkey. But actually what I discovered as soon as I was elected in 2014 is that you could be as busy as you wanted to be in any way that you wanted to be. You know, as an MEP, you have enormous privileges. So even if you weren't on the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Subcommittee for Human Rights, you could still go and turn up and ask to speak. It didn't, in a way, it might have been more helpful that I was not on those committees, because I could be incredibly outspoken. And you mentioned in the introduction to me about my detention at Istanbul airport, which was my first visit to Turkey after the coup. And I thought that after that visit, I just thought that I would never get back into Turkey again. I thought, well, my card's been marked. They're going to know who I am. You know, they're going to be watching me. And I have been very vocal, as you said. And actually, I have continued to visit Turkey throughout the whole of my parliamentary career. And I was there twice in February this year. And I was even a little scared in February, because I was still like, oh, you know, they're going to know who I am. I mean, I know where the interrogation room, you know, I knew where the interrogation room was at Ataturk Airport, because I'd been inside it. But I think there's something to be said for journalists who care about human rights, who want to put that at the forefront of their work. You don't have to be on any of the competent committees or in any of the delegations to stand up for human rights. You just need to make relationships with the organizations who are doing the research and getting the evidence and are on the ground in the countries to be able to speak the truth, you know, to use the evidence in your parliamentary work. So I spoke in countless debates about Turkey, and I spoke in debates that were even not about Turkey and talked about Turkey. So, for example, when the High Representative would come to speak in the Parliament, I would often use a general debate about external relations, external affairs, different instruments for human rights and democracy or whatever. I would use that as a way to talk about Turkey and what it was doing regarding its crackdown on human rights and on media freedom. I also submitted lots of written questions, and we would gather signatures from many other MEPs and be specific, and all written questions required an answer from the commissioner within a given time frame. So, you know, they had to do that. Also, oral questions. I was going back through. I'd actually asked an oral question of the High Representative as well. We had many conferences and roundtables. We set up friendship groups. We had lots of press conferences when there were particularly serious issues that arose. And I made a commitment to always say yes whenever I was invited to go by organisations working on the ground. And I think that what that did was to give me I mean, I learned firsthand. So I could speak in the plenary or at conferences, and I could speak from a position of personal experience. And I think that nobody could counter that. You know, nobody could actually say anything against that, because if you'd had that experience and you'd seen those people and you were mentioning those things in a concrete way in the plenary, actually it was incredibly powerful. Also, with my political, we also had a number of prizes and awards that we nominated people for. So the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, several nominations on subsequent years nominations were made for 2 journalists, and the Solidar Silver Rose Award in 2016 was given to the Turkish journalists trade union for their work in really difficult circumstances. And all those things are ways of bringing to wider public attention the issues that people are experiencing. And what I also tried to do was to link, you know, because when we were being asked to speak about things, there's so many things that you could mention, so many things that you could talk about, but I often tried to link things with my other interests. So for example, I've been a women's rights campaigner, so I talked a lot about the situation for the women's media organisation Jinha, and made a personal relationship with Zara Doan over a long period of time, which was a twinning project between CPJ and Human Rights Watch, for which I wrote cards and sent letters to Zara while she was in prison. She couldn't receive them personally, but they were read to her by her lawyer, and they wrote back to me. So wrote back to me her comments, which made me feel that my small contribution made a difference. And that meant that Zara knew she hadn't been forgotten about in the prison in Diyarbakir, that somebody was speaking for her. And when we speak people's names in those parliament, it protects them. I know that a speech I made, for example, about a human rights defender in Bahrain, I made a 1-minute speech about him on a Thursday, and he was released from prison on a Saturday. So, you know, it's a great power that we have if we choose to speak the names of people who are at risk. And the relationship I made with Zara has continued beyond her release, to the extent that I finally met her in London at an Amnesty International and CPJ event. I then went to see her work at the Tate Gallery in London. I went to an exhibition of her work in a small gallery in Germany. I invited her to speak at a conference in Manchester where we were talking about freedom of expression, at the Anthony Burgess Centre at the university, where I was supporting, in fact, Charter 97, which is the Belarus media organisation that I supported, and actually introducing journalists to each other, journalists who have a common struggle, particularly, and these were both women who've experienced, I mean, Natalia has been imprisoned in a KGB prison in Belarus and is an exile, but introducing these incredible, brave, strong women journalists to each other and giving them a platform was it felt like a really good thing to do to build that solidarity. The other thing that I did was, I'm a child rights campaigner, and so when the media crackdown happened shortly after the coup, I chose to speak about the shutting down of a children's TV station, Zarok TV, which was basically screening, broadcasting cartoons for children, but using Kurdish language. And I think that way of using your own, using the issues that you are working on in a broader way, bringing those into the conversation is very important, because what I wanted to demonstrate was how ordinary life was very difficult for people, for my Kurdish friends, you know, the everyday life. I was very struck earlier in the one of the speakers talked about daily life in China, and I think that idea about how people cannot go about their daily lives because of the surveillance that is continuous. It's very important to show that even children in a playground, you know, or sitting at home wanting to watch cartoons on television, you know, would be engaging in a risky behavior. So a broadcaster broadcasting that kind of content was under threat. So that's just talked about Zara. Oh, and it was amazing. I happened to be in New York at UNCSW in 2018 when Banksy, when the mural of Zara Doan suddenly appeared on a wall in Bowery. And of course, I just couldn't believe it was like the stars had all come together, because she was, you know, she felt like a sister to me, or a daughter. And I realized that I was in a unique position to go to the mural and to talk to people looking at it and to educate them about the situation and to take photographs. I bought flowers from a flower seller and put them there and took photographs, and, you know, and then use my social media platform to put that out in the wider world. So sometimes amazing things happen that you don't expect, and you need to be ready, actually, always to drop that into conversation, to say that, to take that extra journey on the subway, you know, to make a detour somewhere if you're traveling, you know. What to do? What are we going to do about this? And, you know, I'm not an MEP anymore. I don't have that platform anymore. But I still am defending women. I'm still defending children's rights. I'm still defending journalists. I'm still defending artistic freedom, which is also at risk. I've been doing a lot of work with the organisation Free News, which has been documenting violations and shutdowns of artistic freedom. And I've been working with Culture Action Europe and Free News on how we can try and get the violations against artistic freedom taken more seriously. And actually, a woman like Zara Doan crossed those boundaries between journalism and artists, because she was also an artist. And when she didn't have access to computers and writing materials when she was in prison in Diyarbakir, she continued to make artwork using human, human paint. She used menstrual blood. She used mud from the earth in the prison. She used human sweat on scraps of fabric. So I think that just continuing to grow and develop your own knowledge base and keep adding to that is really, really important. Maybe just want to say something about what Turkey is doing outside of its own borders, because Turkey is not just involved in cracking down on media inside Turkey. It is coming after journalists who have fled and are exiles. And that included in 2016, the Turkish government tried to, they put a red notice out against Can Dündar, who was in Germany at the time. And recently they wanted to extradite another journalist, Levent Kenes, who is in Sweden. So we have to be very, very alert to the misuse of, for example, Interpol red notices, the misuse of extradition, the pressure that Turkey might be putting on using its embassies in other countries, you know, to put those journalists' lives at risk. And I say that because a group of educators were seized by Turkish agents in Kosovo, where I did have a responsibility for relations with the country. I was on the delegation for relations with Kosovo, and we managed to stop the extradition of one Turkish educator from Kosovo, but over an Easter bank holiday weekend, another was taken, and Pristina airport is managed by Turkish Airlines, and they just literally came and took these educators, put them on planes, and they have never been seen since. So the state is acting outside of its own territorial boundaries, you know, in a very in a very aggressive way towards its citizens, and where we have EU member states with regressive, right-wing, populist, illiberal leaders, for example, as in Hungary or Poland, you know, we've got to be even more careful about how those governments might respond to a request for an extradition, you know, or put pressure on. So what did I just want to say, well, what do we do about this? Well, those of us who are still in a political party need to put pressure on our own political parties to be braver, to speak up. And I always worked very, very closely with young European socialists, and the PES family includes Turkey, and so we're able to give support to young Turkish political activists and encourage them, you know, give them confidence and demonstrate that we're standing with them. Then it's having lots and lots of support for civil society and NGOs. And actually what the EU is doing now is giving much more of its support and money, not to government programs and the government, but giving it directly to civil society and NGOs. And then there are wonderful NGOs working independently of the EU, like the Goethe Institute and the European Cultural Foundation, for example, not just doing arts and culture work, but doing work around citizenship, democracy, freedom, all this kind of thing. And then I think encouraging people to visit places like the Hrant Dink Site of Memory in Istanbul, where I went in February, you know, to keep raising up awareness of those places which stand as memorial sites of memory to incredibly brave journalists, people who lost their lives, who were murdered, and to keep alive the spirit of their amazing work. I think that's probably all I want to say at this point, but I really thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much for joining, Julie. That was indeed an interesting account of what is going on in Turkey right now, and hearing your personal experience was also very amazing. Thank you very much for coming. So the last speaker of the Turkey session is Mr. Abdullah Ayasun. Abdullah is a freelance journalist based in Washington, D.C. He has been contributing to Huffington Post, the Globe Post, Irish Times, and appeared at CNN and BBC on occasions. He writes on American political affairs, Turkey, the Middle East, and beyond. The title of his speech is COVID-19 Redefines Boundaries on Journalism in Turkey. Mr. Ayasun, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much for the audience and for having me. Well, after these two speakers very well articulated what is going on in Turkey, I just want to emphasize that the situation in terms of media freedom, in terms of the state of journalism in Turkey was already in bad shape. So pandemic did not just make the things worse. Things were already in bad shape. It just changed in some degrees and in some levels. I was just add to a little bit more background and details. I want to share my screen. If you just a second, please. Yes. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
COVID-19 and journalism in Turkey. the state of media amid chaos and fear. Turkish media before pandemic. Both speakers presented a very good picture about Turkey. As the title of my session hints, the media was already in very bad shape before the pandemic. The government's crackdown on media has a long prologue, unfortunately. It goes back to maybe 10 years in a piecemeal fashion. The government has increased and developed its skills of extending its control over media landscape through various and combined methods and measures. One of the measures was financial regulation and the change of the ownership of media outlets by businessmen loyal to the government. The government did not just encourage it, it just forced on some occasions. And long story short, things began to get extremely worse since the coup in 2016. After that, at least 108 media outlets were shut down. More than 100 journalists were placed behind bars. And the crackdown has never dissipated to this day, unfortunately. And the level of its intensity may be subsided, but it has never ended. According to New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, Turkey is the worst jailer of journalists in the world. More than 70 journalists are behind bars, but the number is a matter of controversy because another media platform, P24, Istanbul-based, it puts this number as 92. According to its measurement, media workers in different roles also included to this count. Before the pandemic, in Turkey, we have the ever-present threat of imprisonment, repeated political crackdowns on opposition media, growing unemployment due to financial strain. These were the major challenges that media members and journalists faced before COVID-19 completely altered the landscape of the debate. During the COVID-19, we have seen different forms of censorship, both imposed by the government and self-adopted by the media outlets to avoid government pressure and punishment. The reporting of COVID-19 cases unfortunately became very difficult, if not entirely impossible. Authorities significantly limited the scope of media coverage, and journalists were unable to verify and check the accuracy of the official statistics. This is very important because the Turkish Health Ministry on a daily basis, they provide numbers and they update the public with fresh numbers, but we are not sure because we have some reports on social media that some of the cases could have relation to COVID-19 health reasons, but they were not registered as such. So in this area, we have a problem of accuracy. Some of the journalists in several parts of Turkey, in Bartın, in Kastamonu, in Gaziantep, in Ankara, they face persecution after what the prosecutor says, inciting panic among the public. The Fox TV anchorman Fatih Portakal, one of the most watched TV shows in Turkey, he also faced investigation, but the investigation later dropped. Many of the deaths, as I said before, were suspected to have relation to pandemic, but were not registered as such. There are many reports by Reporters Without Borders and Amnesty International. They confirm that the pandemic only amplified what is already existing in Turkey, the climate of fear. Amnesty International report says, journalists reporting on COVID-19 or even posting on social media feared they may join the swaths of Turkey's independent media workers currently behind bars. Another point which is overlooked and under noticed, that this pandemic hit media financially in very serious terms. Many of the media outlets went through a brutal stress test. The circulation of print media has dropped 25%. Maybe, probably most of the, half of the press workers who joined a survey by press union associated with a left-wing disc, they began to work at home remotely. According to the survey, 6% of the journalists sacked, 12% of them, they just get their payment very late, not on time, and 5%, this survey reveals, they did never get their payment during the pandemic. Many of the journalists report complaints on social media that they are forced to work in unhealthy conditions, and many media outlets issued salary cut. There was another important issue in April. The government, following the footsteps of Iran, Venezuela, and many other countries, and China as well, the government debated a bill to provide a prison amnesty for inmates to reduce the risk of virus contraction in overcrowded prison complex in Turkey. More than 90,000 convicted inmates were released, which is included mafia bosses, rapists, and killers. Unfortunately, despite the campaign from lawmakers from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, unfortunately, journalists were excluded from this amnesty bill. They are still behind bars. And I mentioned about the official toll of coronavirus, that we cannot verify the accuracy of the statistics, but I want to share with you what Health Ministry provided. In total, more than 5 million, nearly 6 million tests were carried out by the health officials across Turkey. These days, we can see reports on social media that in Istanbul, many hospitals, they lack test kits, enough test equipment to expand their test coverage of the population. The number of cases so far, the infected cases, were presented by the Turkish government as more than 250,000. The number of deaths, they are nearly 6,000. And the seriously ill patients who are in intense care unit, 686. Yesterday, there were more than 1,000 confirmed new cases. This shows that despite the positive presentation by the officials, unfortunately, the pandemic shows no slowing down. And yesterday, 22 citizens lost their lives. To sum up this presentation as briefly as possible, Reporters Without Borders, they reported in a recent documentation in July that more than a dozen journalists were arrested. Some of them were released later because of their coverage of COVID-related deaths. The situation for Turkish media became only worse during the pandemic, and a climate of fear has been solidified. The coronavirus helped the government to find new excuses to extend and expand it is already firm grip on media. In economic terms, media was not without any immunity to the impact of pandemic's economic strain and stress. And many media outlets, they just embrace auto-censorship. During the pandemic, half of the journalists began to work remotely, and some of them were forced to work in very unhealthy conditions without any payment guarantee. And To make matters worse, last month in July, Turkish Parliament enacted a new law about a social media, to regulate the social media landscape, which has been the main source of Turkish people's access to information and their main tool of expression. Given the fact that the mainstream media, as Yavuz Baydar noted, mostly under control of the government through direct or indirect mechanisms, social media remains the last shelter for people to express themselves. And in July, they introduced new measures, such as many of the social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they are forced to share their data with the Turkish authorities. And they have to, from now on, store their data inside Turkey. And the anonymity of the users, for instance, we launch a campaign for some cause on social media. We set up a hashtag to galvanize the public. From now on, Turkish government will be able to extract the information of anonymous users. So this law introduced another aspect, which is heavy fines and compensation against these technology companies. If, as a journalist, Abdullah Ayasun, I post a critical tweet, if Facebook or Twitter refuses to remove it on the grounds of free speech, the Turkish government will be able to impose a heavy fine and compensation. So this also threatens and deters the technology companies to advance their operations in Turkish media market. This is the basics of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayasun. Thanks for that detailed explanation of what is going on in the Turkey media right now. This brings us to the Q&A session. I think we can enjoy a full 7 minutes with questions. As I have already said, you can ask your questions by raising your hand at the More function at the bottom of your screen, or you can write me at the chat box. It is from Mira Yeşil. She's one of our hosts of today. So she asks, Dear Julie, while telling me the story of your arrest, you were mentioning an interview that Turkish police asked you whether you are one of those journalists who are trying to make problems. As this question was asked by a plain police officer, do you think the antagonism against freedom of expression emanates from a particular regime or personality in Turkey, or can we speak of a culture of distaste against journalists?
Okay, I'll have to clarify about the incident because the person who asked me that question was actually a clerk at the help desk of Turkish Airlines in Istanbul airport. And I think that speaks of a culture of distrust. And his question to me was, and I should just explain to people that I was traveling to Diyarbakir, and I arrived late on an evening, and I had to get a connecting flight early the next morning, and I booked myself into an airport hotel. And I was very unsure about whether my hotel was inside the airport or outside the airport. And I literally went to and I had my ticket. I had I was checked in all the way through to Diyarbakir, and I didn't have any luggage to check in. So I was literally going to the help desk to ask for help. And what happened at that point is that the first thing I was asked is, are you a journalist who's going to, make trouble about human rights? So he specifically said, you're not going to stir up trouble about human rights and accuse me of being a journalist. And that help desk clerk actually, he obviously called the police about me, because when I went to my hotel to check into my hotel, which was outside the airport, at the reception desk, I was surrounded by half a dozen plainclothes policemen who then took me back to the airport to interrogate me for several hours. So I think it is a culture, and I think it's very worrying that people working in situations of customer care, yes, should, and you know, I mean, you know, I was British. I didn't tell them that I was an MEP, but I was British. I'm an older woman. I'm not, you know, I don't ostensibly look like a kind of troublemaker. I mean, there is a younger male journalist that I know from the Morning Star, and he frequently gets into trouble and has, you know, can't get into Turkey anymore and has been kind of kicked out several times. Steve, he's called. But I didn't think that such a thing would happen to me, I suppose. And I think that it does demonstrate the level of paranoia, actually, you know, amongst people who are public servants, you know, whose job it is. It's not their job to police society. Somebody at the help desk should literally be telling you whether or not you're booked into the right hotel or not, you know. So yeah, I think that does really demonstrate the situation. I was also stopped at the end of that visit. I was in a car, and I was going to Silivri prison, actually, to try and visit Leyla Berlik, the imprisoned HDP MP deputy. And I was with her lawyer, her parliamentary assistant, her brother, and an interpreter. And our car was stopped and searched, and they were just kind of stopping people randomly, actually, as a form of harassment. So, you know, I've experienced it at several levels, I suppose, that, and I think what it demonstrates is that the government is paranoid, and for me, this is evidence of weak leadership. You know, strong leaders don't need to frighten their populations. Strong leaders, you know, have a relationship with their populations and listen and can be compassionate and can admit to mistakes. So weak leaders, which is what I think Erdogan is, you know, can only hang on to power if they put this kind of, you know, this fear into everybody. That's what it feels like to me.
Thank you very much, Ili. I also have a personal question to Mr. Yavuz Baydar. So, dear Yavuz, you're living in Europe and are in constant contact with European colleagues and leaders. Do you think that the European Union and the European Court of Human Rights are doing enough to ease the situation in Turkey?
Absolutely not. I think it's a relationship that is not even in deep freeze. I think it's dead, more or less, brain dead, to use an expression by Macron about NATO. It's only a shadow play, and European Union has lost a very, very precious momentum long ago, and things went really badly from the very beginning, actually, beginning from more or less from 2004, when a conflict country, Cyprus, was imported into the European Union, which caused a lot of stir in Turkey and gave current President Erdogan a lot of powers to start taking everything in control, sidelining pro-EU elements on the top of European Union. They lost a lot of arguments as things continued in the same manner with the entry of French President Sarkozy. Things got even worse, because the debate suddenly became whether or not Turkey geographically belonged to Turkey or culturally belonged to Turkey, etc., belonged to European Union, excuse me, or not. And this was a ridiculous process, which I think caused a lot of damage to the pro-EU spirit in Turkey across the table. And one thing led to another. and everything worked in favor of Erdogan. And in a nutshell, I think the sad part is there was no coherent Turkey strategy within European Union. This was mismanaged, it was mishandled, and as a result, we are where we are. And what we see now in the redentism, expansionism, now we see in Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey's aspirations to choose demilitarized language in foreign policy issues, as much as police state measures at home, have nothing to do with whatever values the European Union have these days. So it's a lost opportunity. As I said, the European Union has no tools or leverages anymore, absolutely zero, to have any influence at all about the changes, about the dynamics inside Turkey. So not only that, also we see a lot of loss of influence on the European Court of Human Rights, which Ankara ignores completely in the same spirit as Baku or Moscow. So Turkey is, unfortunately, with its extremely complex society and social dynamics, is left to its own devices, which are not very strong. So I am very pessimistic about the prospects, and there is absolutely nothing to be done about the changes that one expects from democratic point of view. And I'm afraid things will become even worse. The more crisis deepens in Turkey on every level, as I said, culturally, politically, economically, socially, etc., we will see a story. We will have to cover and report a story of a country whose golden momentum is lost and which has been driven into a state of into a definition of a rogue state, and unfortunately mishandling its own individuals and citizens. As I said, much is to blame, of course, in Erdogan and his team, his cadres, but certain parts of the European Union is really to blame for the result that we are facing now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baydar. Julie, would you also like to comment on this question about the EU, whether or not it is doing something about the issues in Turkey?
I think that orienting support to away from state to civil society is necessary, and I support that. I think that you know, I was very sad when Turkey withdrew from Creative Europe, for example, when it's decided that it doesn't want to be part of those really important people-to-people intercultural dialogue, mobility, exchange programs, because it is your generation, it is the younger generation that you know, is going to have to sort out the mess that my generation has created in terms of climate change, economic, you know, economic crises, you know, the refugee situations, which are largely to do with, you know, imperial intervention, you know. So I think that in terms of soft power, the EU does a lot, and a lot of that stuff is under the radar and people don't necessarily know about it. We have a massive problem with the EU when we have member state governments like Orban, you know, who promote an illiberal democracy and don't uphold European values. And you know, we have a number. I was looking at one of the slides earlier. Somebody put up a slide about countries that were, you know, had done, had made media freedom more difficult in the current pandemic. And Romania was in that list. So, you know, we have countries where all kinds of repressive laws are being made under cover of COVID-19, and EU member states are not immune from that. And increasingly, we've got, you know, we've got very, very populist leaders and parties, you know, who are shouting for their own national interests and not for global, you know, not for in the interests of humankind. So I think there are problems, but I think that I don't feel as hopeless as the previous, as my fellow speaker, and that's because I do have hope in the future generation, and because when I work with lots of young people, they are pro-European. I mean, here in the UK, in the referendum, the young people who were able to vote voted largely to stay in the EU, and that's because in this globalized world, we are in touch with our neighbors, you know, in a variety of different ways, even if we're not in the same room visiting them, you know, having exchanges or on holiday. We're still very, very aware of the different cultural traditions, you know, and things that are going on and all the rest of it. And so I think that, I mean, the EU needs to change, and it radically needs to change. But I hold out hope that it can and will change and address these serious crises that it's facing and be able to build back better. That has to be also has to include not continuing to support terrible repressive regimes like Belarus, for example, you know, like Russia, like China. We cannot, for me, the EU is a peace project first and foremost. And yes, it's a trading bloc too, but trade was a kind of scaffold around which sort of held the peace together. And when you have politicians elected and they only want to talk about trade at any price, that's where we have a problem. And that's why I wanted to talk about post-Brexit trade deals, because I think we're going to have some serious problems in this country. And, you know, I mean, Boris Johnson and various other ministers, you know, have been shaking hands with Erdogan, and they continue to do that. They you know, they won't speak out about the violations. And so we really have to, I think we just have to keep educating the wider population and the younger generations. I mean, I think sanctions are going to have to be used in a variety of ways in a number of different countries. You know, it's looking like, so sometimes people think the EU isn't doing sanctions, but it's doing some sanctions internally at the minute, which are almost unprecedented. That is the withdrawal of regional development funds from the towns and cities in Poland that declared themselves to be LGBT-free zones. Okay, that is happening, and that should give people hope. You know, if the Commission is prepared to withdraw funding from its own funding of its own programs from cities that don't uphold gender equality values, then surely it ought to be putting in place sanctions for other countries where there are very, very serious human rights violations.
Thank you very much, Julie. And we have a question from our audience, from Margaret, if she's here.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
I have Mr. Ayasun, if it is okay. While getting prepared for hosting this event, I found out that in your Twitter account, you use the profile info as rootless cosmopolitan, no country for young men. Where does this sense of uprootedness come? If, of course, you don't find this question too personal to elaborate on.
Thank you for the question. Well, to be honest, I live in the US for 4 years now, and I practice journalism mostly in English. So for the past 10 years, not in Turkish. And over the past 10 years, I just wrote maybe 4 or 5 articles in Turkish. The rest of them were in English. So it brought me to encounter both from my education in the university and during my professional career with this language and with this culture much more close. The American literature, the British culture. And now the United States is my adopted new country because of the political situation back in Turkey, and I cannot go back to Turkey. Well, that profile, how came it into existence, was driven by my affection for Cormac McCarthy, an American writer, and he's a famous novel which was later adapted to a film on the screen, No Country for Old Men. I just twisted it, No Country for Young Men, because I cannot go back to Turkey. And if I go to Asia or Middle East for travel, I may face the risk of extradition to Turkey, because only Europe and European Union countries, they reject the appeal of the Turkish government for extradition of journalists and political prisoners, or let's say political opponents of the government. So it's a little bit dangerous for me. That's what I chose, No Country for Young Men as well, not just old men. And I consider myself a world citizen. Of course, I have strong roots with Turkey. I come from Turkey. I'm a Turkish citizen. But at the same time, I consider myself a cosmopolitan who can embrace both the West and East. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayasun. So with this last answer, I will close this session. Let's give a warm applause to the speakers, Yavuz Baydar, Julie Ward, and Abdullah Ayasun. It was really nice to be here with you. So we won't be able to do the networking session again, and we're directly going to move into the Russia session. Thank you very much all.